Correct.
Okay. What do you see when you look out there at that time?
It looked like a tussle. I could really only see one person, and I think I described it as possibly being some type of dog attack because there are a lot of dogs that walk in that back area, and I could only see, an object.
You mentioned when you put your foot out and you first saw something out there, you mentioned vertical. Can you elaborate a little bit more on that?
If I'm looking at someone in the backyard, they're faced directly onto the ground, so they're vertical. They're not horizontal, they're vertical to me.
Okay. All right, so they're vertical, meaning the same way you are right now in terms of like this.
So they would be making a T with the sidewalk, if that helps.
Okay, all right. In terms of the side, the second positioning or the change in position, if we call it, they were horizontal. At that point, could you tell there were still two individuals, the same people?
Yes.
Okay, and in terms of describing the individuals, are you able to describe their faces or anything, or just clothing descriptions?
Well, going back to when they were vertical, I could tell the person on the bottom had a lighter skinned color. Correct.
Okay, all right. And when you saw them horizontal at that positioning, who was on top and who was in the bottom?
It was the same position still.
Okay, all right.
At that time.
You used the terms vertical, horizontal, and I want to just sort of clarify those so that we're on the same page. Mm-hmm. I'm going to use horizontal as being laying flat on the ground. Okay?
Well, that's your perception of it. If you're looking at them, that would be horizontal a different way.
Okay? That's why I want to clear it up. I'm going to suggest and see if we can agree for this conversation that horizontal would mean that they're laying on the ground flat. I'm not saying anyone was yet, we'll get to that, but that the term horizontal means basically you are laying on the ground flat.
They were laying on the ground.
Okay. And then vertical would be, as I am now, standing up vertical, and we'll get to some more in a minute, but right now, can we agree that I'm standing up vertically?
Correct.
Okay. With that in mind, and again, tell me now, using the terms we've agreed to, what was it that you remember saying?
They were laying on the ground, and if you fell back vertically, that's how I would be looking at them.
So if I was on my back vertically, that was one of the people?
That was how I could see it.
Okay.
But the one that I could see in the beginning, his back was towards me, but facing downward.
Okay. Well, let me say it like this, if I might approach it somewhat. The person that you could see, you said you saw his back?
Mm-hmm.
Was he like this?
At the beginning, no.
Okay. How was he? And just sort of point me how he was when you first saw him.
You'd have to go all the way to the ground.
Over more. Like that?
No. It was more just flat on flat.
Okay. So one person horizontal on top of the other?
Correct.
Okay. And then when did that change?
When it moved up to the sidewalk.
Okay. So as we now move closer to the sidewalk, what is the positioning of the two, or what you see?
It happened very quick.
Okay.
But that's when it was at more of a straddle position once it got onto the sidewalk.
And when you say straddle, can you explain that in more detail?
Do we get another
If you wish.
visual?
Sure.
No, I'm okay.
Let's try it this way. I want to, so not just you get to embarrass me, but the jury gets to see it as well.
No, it was more just the person on top's legs were over the person on the bottom that was laying flat on the ground.
Okay. So now the person on top is in fact like this over the person on the bottom?
I would say that's accurate.
Okay. And the person on the bottom was laying flat?
Correct.
Could you tell if he was on his back or not?
He was on his back.
He was on his back. At this point, what's the person on the back wearing? I'm sorry, the person on the top whose back you can see wearing?
It was the same person that was on the top when they were T-shaped to the sidewalk.
Okay, so they did
dark
not.
colors.
I'm sorry. They did not change positions, did they?
No.
Except one, the one on top in the black, actually instead of laying down on the guy on the bottom, was now straddling him, correct?
Correct.
And They are now closer to the cement pathway, correct?
They would be on the cement at that point,
On the cement.
movement going downward.
And from the time that you were first stepped out to watch them until the time you turned back around was about 8 to 10 seconds, correct?
I would say because it was very quick.
So
it
8 to
wasn't-
10 seconds?
Yeah, it wasn't a long time, no.
Okay. Mr. Delarianda asked you if it could have been as little as 2, and I thought you said yes, but it was a lot more than 2, wasn't it?
I didn't state the entire thing was 2 seconds, no.
Ah, let's do that then. The entire time that you were actually watching what was going on,
8 to 10 seconds
8 to
probably.
10 seconds.
Yes.
And that's when you had your focus specifically on what turned out to be, as we now know, Trayvon Martin and George Zimmerman, right?
Correct.
You didn't know it then, but now we know. And even in your initial statement, when you first had an opportunity to talk to an officer about this, the very first time, you explained as best you can recall what you saw, right?
Correct.
And what you saw was the person on top in an MMA-style straddle position, correct?
Correct.
That was further described, was it not, as being ground and pound,
Correct.
right? What is ground and pound, as you
That's
define
usually
it?
what takes place in that type of position.
Sure. So MMA, to the extent that you're aware of it, and MMA is mixed martial arts,
Correct.
you knew it enough to start giving terminology like ground and pound to what you saw, right?
It was the first thing that came to my mind, yes.
That the person on top was ground and pounding the person on the bottom?
That's what it looked like, yes.
So, explain what ground and pound is in your mind.
The person on top being able to punch the person on the bottom, but the person on the bottom also has a chance to get out or punch the person on top. It's back and forth.
Sure. And which is the dominant position?
It would be the top position.
Because why?
For most people, that would be the dominant position.
And in this, now let's go to this case that night that you saw. The person who you now know to be Trayvon Martin was on top, correct?
Correct.
And he was the one who was raining blows down on the person on the bottom, George Zimmerman, right?
That's what it looked like.
Okay.
Correct.
Now, and I said a moment ago you were literal because,
Correct.
and then that's when you saw him striking down.
That's when it looked like, yes, our movement going downward. Correct.
How many times do you think, if you had
I
to
have
guess?
no idea. As soon as I saw the movement going downward, that's when I turned around and went back inside.
That's when you knew it was very serious?
Yes, it looked like it was getting serious, and it wasn't just someone playing around.
And that's when you can hear George Zimmerman screaming for help, right?
Incorrect.
What was it? When was it?
That was in the beginning when I finally saw someone under the person on top.
And I apologize for so they are now moved up. They're now in the true ground and pound position. And Mr. Delarianda, I think, made some histrionics about what you heard and what you didn't hear. So I now have to do it as well. Okay? Did you hear something like this?
No.
Okay. Could something like that have happened without you being able to hear it?
Objection, speculation.
Sustained.
Were you paying attention to the noise of the ground and pound that you were watching?
Probably not. I was just seeing to make sure if it was serious or not, and that's when I went back inside.
Okay. Have you ever heard the sound of a skull being smacked against concrete?
I can't remember.
Have you heard the sound of a fist driving into a nose or a head or a face?
I can't remember.
So while it wasn't the histrionics that Mr. Delarianda suggested, it certainly it could have occurred that Mr. Trayvon Martin was hitting Mr. Zimmerman, but you just don't remember today the sound of that?
Objection, speculation.
Sustained. Rephrase your question.
Sure, I'll rephrase it. You're certainly not telling this jury that you're certain that Mr. Martin wasn't striking George Zimmerman in the face, right?
Can you repeat that?
Yeah. You're certainly not telling this jury that you know that Mr. Martin was not striking George Zimmerman in the face. You just
I
don't-
can't 100% confirm that that was happening.
Right. You, of course, have testified during your deposition and other times regarding what you heard and the disparity or the seeming disparity between what you remember hearing and what the 911 call seems to indicate. right?
If you're referring to the call you played in my deposition, yes.
Yes. It just doesn't seem like the same screams to you, does it?
Well, one's coming from an audio and one I was hearing in person, so it didn't sound the same to me.
So you perceived them differently than you heard on the 911 call, correct?
Yes.
You're certainly not suggesting to this jury that they're not the same screams from different perspectives, are you?
I couldn't say.
Okay. You are aware that Ms. Lauer's call to 911 was timed perfectly with the screams that she heard and, of course, the gunshot that you heard, correct?
What do you mean?
Okay. You heard the gunshot, correct?
Correct.
And you've also heard that gunshot on Ms. Lauer's tape, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So going back in time from the gunshot backwards on Ms. Lauer's tape, you heard on Ms. Lauer's tape that there was probably 40 seconds worth of screaming that was recorded on that call, correct?
Objection is speculation in terms of the time.
He can testify if he knows.
Sure.
Can you repeat the question?
Sure. You remember listening. I tell you what, here's what we'll do. If we might just have a moment, I'm going to let you listen to Ms. Lauer's call again. And I want you, when you're listening to it, I want you to think through, I will tell you that 45 seconds into the phone call, you're going to hear the gunshot. So be ready for that, because I want you to then testify what you remember seeing sort of in timeline with when you remember hearing the shot, okay?
I wouldn't be able to tell you.
I'm going to let you hear the tape, and then
Okay.
we'll go from there. If I might have a moment to set that up, Your Honor.
911, do you need police, fire, medical?
Maybe both, I'm not sure. There's just someone screaming outside.
Okay, what's the address that they're near? Is this in the Twin Lake Town in Sanford?
Yes,
Okay, and is it a male or female?
it sounds like a male.
And you don't know why?
I don't know why. I think they're yelling help, but I don't know. Just send someone quick. Say stop.
Okay, does he look hurt?
I can't see him. I don't want to go out there. I don't know what's going on. So they're sending him.
So you think he's yelling help?
Yes.
All right, what is your number?
There's gunshots.
You just heard gunshots?
Yes.
Okay, you heard the gunshot towards the end of what the recording?
Yes.
Okay. And I know, again, from different perspectives, but with your knowledge of the information of this case, that was the same gunshot that you heard from inside your house?
It didn't sound the same. It sounded more like a rock hitting my window because I was inside.
Of course. And it was only a few seconds before that gunshot that you were outside looking at the two individuals in the ground and pound positioning.
Correct.
The yells that you heard, however, or the helps that you heard, however many there were, it was always the same voice, correct?
That I personally heard?
Yes.
Yes.
There was no second voice yelling anything, was there?
Not that I heard.
And when you ran outside, or when you went outside that time that you went out to your porch, you actually told him to stop, right?
I said, "What's going on? Cut it out. Stop,"
Cut it out.
something like that.
Okay. And the person who we now know to be Trayvon Martin on top didn't stop, did he?
No one stopped.
He didn't even acknowledge that you were there?
I don't remember seeing anyone turn around.
Did he turn and look at you even?
No.
He just kept doing what he was doing,
Yes.
even though you asked him to stop.
I guess I asked him, yes.
And the voice screaming for help, however many times that you heard it, it was just one person's voice?
When I heard it outside,
Yes.
I believe it was just one person's voice, yes.
And you now believe that that was George Zimmerman's voice, correct?
I never said that.
Do
I
you
said
believe-
it could have been his, but I was not 100% sure.
I'm not asking for 100% certainty. I'm asking you to use your common sense and to tell us if you think that that was George Zimmerman's voice screaming for help, the person on the bottom.
That's just my opinion.
Nothing further, Your Honor.